On the eve of the harvest, Eli found Marianne by the old ribbon, her fingers trailing over silk worn thin by months of prairie wind. He held out the shears, offering silently. She shook her head, gently slipped the ribbon free, and looped it around his wrist. Not tightly, just a soft streak of color against his sun-browned skin. Eli took her other hand, their rough palms meeting with quiet understanding, and together they walked down the row where the earth smelled warm and yeasty, like bread just before baking. They packed the grain into tight burlap sacks, laughter rising with every burst of flying chaff when a kernel popped free. That night, heat lit up the clouds and forks of lightning crawled like white fire over the hills. The boards beneath their bare feet creaked as they stood side by side watching the sky dance. When the rain finally came, it fell heavy and warm, soaking their shirts until they clung like second skin. Marin tilted her face into it, eyes closed, catching the storm like a benediction. Eli reached out, brushing a bead of water from her cheekbone with the back of one careful finger, then leaned in and kissed the spot, gentle as if sealing a wound. She opened her eyes, startled, and in them he saw a reflection of his own surprise. Her reply was a kiss that carried no hesitation, tasting of rain, salt, and a long-held silence finally brave enough to speak. At sunrise, they sat side by side on the edge of the barn, steam rising from the fields like ghosts letting go. Marin slowly opened her hand. Inside was the crumpled note from the lawyer, soggy around the edges. The ink bled into faint blue veins. Eli stared, a question forming but never spoken. She let the wind take the scrap, watched it tumble, settle, and dissolve into the wet soil. Then she pulled out the old letter, the one about forgiveness, and unfolded it for the final time. She read it aloud, voice steady. "Find him, tell him I forgive." Then gently she touched Eli's chest. "Found him," she said, quieter now. "I'm staying." He nodded once, like he was tallying something in his head, then stood, stretched, and spoke the first full sentence she'd heard in days. "Barn roof needs painting by noon." Her laughter rang out bright and clear, echoing across the open land like a church bell with no walls. She followed him into the sunlight, already warming the wood beneath their feet, already glowing with the promise of a safe horizon. And with every stroke of the brush, every quiet heartbeat, the ranch leaned into forever, not out of obligation, but out of a silence warmer than words. Summer burned into a deep copper autumn. Corn stood high in sheaves beside the barley sacks, and the new barn walls turned a soft chestnut hue under the changing skies, darkening from sun and rain alike. Eli and Marin moved through the days like two lungs breathing from the same body. He split fence posts while she drove them into the ground. She combed through wool mailed from a neighbor a county over. He built her a loom out of leftover cedar. On clear nights, they spread grain across canvas strips to dry between the rows. The prairie sky cracked open above them with shooting stars. Their shoulders brushed as they tugged the fabric tight against sudden gusts of wind. When the chill rolled down from the stars, Eli fetched a quilt, settling beside her on the warm planks of the porch. She leaned back until her head rested softly on his thigh. And in that simple gesture, in that quiet surrender, they both realized what it meant to start a future with no grand announcement. No letter ever came from the likes of Voss. No railroad agent showed up with claims or threats. Beyond the gate, the world kept trudging on, but inside the bend, mornings held stillness, the wind too kind to carry trouble. By late October, Eli took the wagon to the county fair, hauling 2 sacks of honeycomb and Marin's jars of pickled beets. He returned not only with a blue ribbon, but with a boxed set of china cups she'd once admired in silence months ago. The ribbon he nailed proudly above the barn door, the cups he placed on the kitchen shelf, carefully nestled in straw, hands awkward but gentle, blushing under her astonished grin. That night they drank bitter chicory from those delicate cups. She teased him for holding the handle like it was crystal, afraid it might break the moment and everything it promised. He just smiled, his shoulders finally loose, and said her name like it was part of the land. "Marin, they're yours, same as every stretch of sky you can see from here." Then winter came heavy. Snow blanketed the pasture and roof. Wind whistled through the stovepipe like some old spirit owls made their calls from the dark barn rafters. Eli moved his cot out of the cold tack room and into the corner of the cabin. But one sleepless night, when sleet rattled the windows, Marrin crossed the floor with both quilts in hand, laid them over his chest, and quietly slid beneath them beside him, her back shaped to fit the space that had waited for her. He wrapped an arm around her without speaking. Outside, ice tapped gently against the shutters, but inside, warmth collected where their knees touched. Neither one moved until dawn smeared its quiet gray across the ceiling. From that day forward, the cot stayed empty, a silent monument to solitude left behind. In February, a yellow telegram arrived, the word urgent stamped across the top. Eli opened it at the table while Marrin worked dough for bread. A cousin he hadn't seen in over a decade was dying back east. There'd be a barn auction. No one left to tend the old family plot. He stared at the words, repeating what Joss had said. The trip would cost him at least 3 weeks of feed runs. Longer if snow blocked the mountain pass. Marrin wiped her hands on a flour-stained cloth, read the message, and simply said, "Go. Sunrise Bend will hold." They argued only about the mare. She insisted he take the stronger horse and the Winchester rifle. Eli gave in when she reminded him she could still outshoot most drifters with her old revolver. At first light, he rode out, head bowed against the wind, but halfway down the lane, something made him turn. And there she was, standing on the porch rail, hair whipping like a battle flag in the breeze. That image stuck with him through every mile of empty land. Storms tore across the sky while he was away. Marrin hauled bales, shattered ice crusts in the troughs, and stitched up a colt's flank after a run-in with wire. On the bitterest night, when the pump gave out, she melted snow over the fire, working by the flicker of an amber lantern. Alone in that soft glow, she read her sister's letter one final time. Then, without drama or sorrow, she fed it to the flames, not to say goodbye, but because its truth had already planted roots and no longer chained her to mourning. The ash curled upward, then vanished into wind. Something inside her rose, light and untethered. Eli came back beneath a pale March moon, saddle creaking under him, beard fuller, eyes hollowed by the journey, but shining with quiet relief at every fence post, still standing. Marrin met him halfway across the yard, snow crunching under bare feet. She reached for his coat before he could even dismount. He smelled like smoke and old memories. Before she could say a word, he pressed a small bundle into her hand. A thin gold ring shaped like a lariat with no end. His voice cracked like the first skim of ice on a pond. "Couldn't find the right words on the platform," he said. "But this felt right." She slid the ring onto her finger without a moment's pause. Then she wrapped both hands around his and guided him toward the door, glowing with firelight. The same door that had weathered every mile of his absence. Spring softened the earth. Birds made nests under the barn eaves. Calves stumbled through the muck, lungs fresh and wild. They were married beneath the old cottonwood, the same one that once bore a rope, now crowned in pale green buds. Deputy Breyer rode out to sign the papers, drink whiskey from enamel mugs, and bear witness. There were no loud vows, no grand declarations. Eli promised he'd never open her letters unless she asked. Marrin promised to speak her truth even when silence felt easier. Friends stood in a loose circle. Wade and Ayla from the far end of the pasture, the seed trading preacher, the depot boy who once waved at every westbound train. They feasted on fried corn and honey bread as the sunset caught fire across the sky. That night, lightning flickered beyond the ridge, but rain never touched Sunrise Bend. Marrin left the cabin door wide open, letting warm wind drift through the rooms like music. Eli still carried her across the threshold, bare feet and all, their laughter ringing off walls that no longer remembered what it meant to be alone. Later in the quiet, he traced the scar at her neck like reading a story in Braille. She laid her hand over the old wound in his chest, the one that wasn't from bullets or blades, but from living. They both carried proof, marks that had faded, yes, but still mapped the soul in a way gentle hands could read. Harvest came again, more bountiful than before. Years stacked like hay bales in the loft. Strangers kept arriving, a runaway boy hunting rail work, an aging laundress escaping soot-stained cities, a piano tuner who slept one night in the hay and left a lullaby clinging to the rafters. Every soul was fed. Everyone rode on lighter than they arrived. Each took away the same story. There's a ranch where silence doesn't cut, it heals. One golden September morning, Marin knelt beside a fresh garden bed, apron stretched over her rounded belly. Eli brought water and stopped just to watch, her fingers pressing seedlings into the damp earth with a quiet purpose he'd come to admire. She looked up, smiled, and in that slow tilt of her mouth, he saw the very horizon he once thought had disappeared return, alive and full of promise. That evening they sat together beneath the porch roof while dusk swallowed the ridge. Marin pulled a soft folded square from her pocket, the old note tied to her heritage money, its edges worn smooth by time. She laid it on his knee, and together they lit the first wick of a brand-new lantern with it. "For the barn," she whispered. "Once the baby comes." The flame caught and bloomed steady. Eli wrapped an arm around her shoulders, holding her close as night settled like a warm blanket across the prairie. Far off, a stagecoach rattled over distant ground, but it no longer tugged at her bones. Sunrise Bend now beat in her chest like a second heart, a stillness no words could fully contain, but one they both lived inside. Winter came heavy, wrapping pasture and rooftops in thick blankets of snow. The wind howled through the stovepipe, and owls whispered secrets in the barn rafters. Eli moved his cot from the chilly tack room to a warm corner of the cabin. But one restless night, when sleet rattled against the window panes, Marin crossed the floor, carrying 2 quilts. She laid them gently over his chest, then slipped beneath the covers, her back curving into the familiar shape of belonging. Without a word, Eli wrapped an arm around her. Outside, ice ticked on the shutters, but warmth pooled where their knees touched, and neither stirred, until dawn spilled soft gray light across the ceiling. From that morning on, the cot stood empty, a quiet monument to the solitude he had surrendered. February brought a telegram stamped urgent, yellowed and trembling with urgency. Eli unfolded the note at the kitchen table while Marin kneaded bread beside him. A cousin he hadn't seen in a decade was dying back east. There was an auction planned for the family's old homestead, and no one left to tend the graveyard. He stared at the words, caught in the weight of travel and time. The trip would cost 3 weeks of feed runs, maybe more, if snow blocked the mountain pass. Marin wiped flour from her knuckles and read the telegram aloud. Then simply she said, "Go." The sun-baked earth of Sunrise Bend would hold firm. They argued only over the mare. She insisted he take the stronger horse and the Winchester. Eli yielded when she reminded him she could still outshoot most drifters with the revolver. At dawn he rode out head low against the wind. Halfway down the lane he looked back and saw her standing on the porch railing, her hair snapping like a banner in the breeze. That vision stayed with him through every empty mile. Storms tore the horizon while he was gone. Back home, Marin hauled hay, broke ice in water troughs, stitched a colt's fresh wound, and on the coldest night melted snow in the fireplace when the pump seized. Alone beneath the glow of an amber lantern, she read the folded letter one last time, then fed it to the flames, not in farewell, but because its message had already been fulfilled and no longer bound her to grief. Ash curled upward, drawn into the dark by the wind, and her chest felt light enough to float. Eli returned beneath a pale March moon, saddle creaking, beard thicker, eyes tired but bright with relief at every intact board he passed. She ran from the porch, snow crunching beneath her boots, caught his coat before his foot touched the earth. He smelled of train smoke and memory. Without letting her pull back, he pressed a bundle into her palm, a thin gold ring shaped like an unbroken lariat. "Couldn't find the words on the platform," he said, voice brittle like the first ice on the pond. "But these, look right." She slid the ring onto her finger and answered by taking his calloused hand in both hers, guiding him toward the glowing doorway that had waded through every mile of his leaving. Spring thawed the ground. Birds nested in the barn eaves. Calves kicked through mud with new lungs. They wed beneath the cottonwood that once carried a rope, now crowned in pale buds. Deputy Stone rode out to sign the license, sharing whiskey in enamel cups. No vows louder than necessary. He promised to keep her letters unopened unless asked. She promised to speak, even when silence felt easier. Friends gathered in a loose circle, Wade and Iana from the far border pasture, the preacher who still traded seeds, the depot boy who'd once waved every westbound coach. They feasted on honey bread and fried corn as dusk set the sky aflame. That night lightning danced beyond the ridge, but rain never touched Sunrise Bend. Marn left the cabin door wide, letting warm wind wander the rooms. Eli carried her across the threshold anyway, feet bare, laughter echoing against log walls that no longer remembered loneliness. In the hush that followed, he traced the ribbon scar on her neck like reading Braille, and she rested a palm over the healed knot in his heart. Both marks proof that bruises may fade, but still write maps for gentle hands. Harvest multiplied, years stacked like hay bales in the loft.